Hello, everyone. Books with Banks back again, and I am so grateful to once again be joined by Steven Erikson, author of Malazan Book of the Fallen and the Kharkanas prequels. I'm currently working on the Witness sequel trilogy. Thank you for coming on here. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for the invitation, Alex. It's always good to be here.
Thank you. So we were originally going to have a specific conversation, a little bit more focused on the heavier things like genocide in the series, but I figured we'd maybe scale it back, or we'd maybe just keep this to a sort of sequel-ish conversation, a follow-up, where we can talk about Kharkanas, following up from what we discussed before, and to sort of give us a bit of a roadmap here, I asked subscribers, and if you're watching, thank you for watching, but I asked some people on YouTube if they had any questions or any things they were wondering about the series. So one of the first questions like this comes from Tim H, and he asks, about the stylistic choices in the writing, narrative, point of view structure in Kharkanas specifically, explaining it's nothing like anything he's personally read before, what authors and books were your inspiration. I believe last time we spoke a little bit about the Shakespeare influence on the style. And I guess just, going off of this individual's question and jumping off of that, do you have any further comments? Anything to add there?
I don't know. I mean, I probably at the time when I was reading through all of Shakespeare, I was constantly being reminded of the oral tradition that is underpinning all of that. That goes right back to classical Greece, I guess. And bearing in mind that a lot of that kind of information was being originally, I guess, translated from the Greek, from ancient Greek, at least in time for people like Shakespeare to be fully aware of this stuff and to make use of it and to reinterpret it into their modern settings. And so while Shakespeare was very much an influence, there was also the sense of what I call declamation, which is a thing we basically don't see in fiction, in modern fiction these days at all. We do occasionally see it in stage plays because that's the medium is built for it. But I would say even most of the plays I've watched in the last 10 years tend not to have a single individual, unless they're doing a kind of the equivalent of a voiceover to set a stage or to set a scene. But something about that was quite interesting because there is that sense of when you're reading something like that, it feels antiquated, right? Because it's just not our experience in terms of reading modern narrative. And so I wanted, since I was doing a prequel that was going back millennia, I wanted to have the style actually reflect that element of antiquity to it. So it's why I sort of chose that particular style for the Kharkanas trilogy. But what I quickly discovered, much to my surprise, is the cadence of that kind of oratory is really seductive as a writer. Once you fall into it, it becomes easier and easier to actually write, which probably explains why it was so prevalent and popular through centuries, because there's a mnemonic device that's obviously being used here, subconsciously anyways, or maybe originally consciously, and that that kind of rhythm fits very, very nicely with as a mnemonic device, as a device for remembering your story and where you are in the story. And of course, you can see that in the Iliad, and you can see that in the Odyssey, where and in Beowulf, for that matter. So there are certain phrases that are little islands of narrative that you can land on and recompose for the next section. So, whether it's Wine Dark Sea or whatever, these phrases are, there's a rhythm to them, there's a cadence to them. And I actually really started enjoying sort of the sense of that. And it kind of changed the way I approach the structuring of the novel itself. And so it sort of everything sort of expanded out from that original cadence. And then I quickly discovered that if you were to read it out loud, it's very easy to read out loud.
All right, thank you. And maybe kind of building off of that, so I recently just did a chat with AP about the potential for Malazan adaptation. If Kharkanas were adapted, do you think can you see a world where a stage production of Kharkanas was performed?
Absolutely. Yeah, more so than anything else. With maybe the exception of the willful child stuff, could certainly be as either as it could be staged. I think so. I think it's a much more self-contained story, even though it may not initially feel like it. It's quite self-contained compared to the Malazan stuff. And it doesn't sort of invite that opportunity to make use of some of the strengths of dramatic narrative, of stage production and performance. So yeah, I think so. I think that would be possible. I don't ever see it happening, but it's
right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the last time I had a conversation with friends about what plays we all went to see.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
yeah, unfortunately, but yeah. I am wondering. I have some theories of my own about this, and I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you too many detailed, specific questions about Shakespeare, because I'm not sure how recently you've read stuff. I'm not going to give you a quiz, but I guess why do you think so many students, kids in public education and stuff, seem to bounce off of Shakespeare maybe more than other classics? And then do you think when people describe the style of Kharkanas as having an element of Shakespeare in that, do you think that then leads some to kind of
bounce off?
Right, yeah, it sort of scares people away. I'm curious if you have any theories on what what that is.
Sure. If you look at the Shakespearean plays, it's worth recognizing that it's kind of an elaborate, almost a director's version of a film or television script. So the director's one will have stage directions in it, shot directions, that kind of thing, specific cameras, lenses, all the rest. So it's kind of an instruction book. And when it's written that way, there is no extraneous information in there. It's all crucial. And plays are like that. They are, if you look at the script of a play, I'm sure maybe in school, maybe you did The Crucible or something along those lines in high school or whatever.
Yeah.
There's nothing extraneous in there. And so you actually have to read quite carefully when you're reading this stuff. And I suspect that there's an element of expectation that if you're going to crack open a book, you can sort of leisurely meander your way through it in a fairly lazy fashion, and you'll get the basic gist of the story. And in most works of fiction, that's quite true, especially in novels, where there's a lot of, I wouldn't call it fat, but there's a lot of stuff that in a short story would have been trimmed away.
Okay.
But in a novel, you've got that expanded space in which to thicken things up. Stage plays as printed have none of that. Scripts as printed have none of that, and so that expectation is often thwarted, because you realize you have to read very carefully, and so much of what occurs especially in Shakespeare's plays has to do with almost the internal landscape of the characters as they are expressed, by the things they say, almost more than the things they do. And so it requires a different kind of focus and a different, you have to turn up the gain on the radar when you're reading that stuff. And I remember in school, I was about the laziest student you could imagine. So the whole notion of having to actually work at this stuff, I recoiled from it. So it's not too surprising.
Okay. Yeah. I think we read Julius Caesar was my first, and then we did Macbeth. But there was like a divide between like the honors classes and other classes, and so some students were reading like Romeo and Juliet while we were reading Julius Caesar, and I always thought that was really interesting, having conversations with people who I don't know. I eventually went back and read Romeo and Juliet, and I'm glad that wasn't my introduction to Shakespeare, I think.
Oh yeah? How come?
I think, well, so I love his histories, and I don't think I would have found my way to those as quickly if I started with Romeo and Juliet, but because of Julius Caesar and just, I guess, what he's tackling there, and then I started to look at Antony and Cleopatra, and then I found, oh, there's actually, like, these are, I guess, technically tragedies, even though there's a history element there, of course. But then I saw, oh, there's a whole category of specifically English history plays, and so yeah, I'm really happy to have gone that way. And I also think just reading about a character or finding that Brutus was basically the protagonist of the play, I thought was wonderful. I thought that was a really nice surprise, whereas nothing about Romeo and Juliet particularly surprised me. That might just be because it's been redone and reinterpreted or like remade in so many different ways, but yeah, so I still enjoy Romeo and Juliet. The language is beautiful, but I'm just really happy that Caesar was my introduction.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, it's a case of the creator sort of stretching their capacities, and recognizing that you can do a tragedy on a very sort of small scale, a human scale, basically a love story.
Right.
But then you can take that notion of tragedy and you can expand it dramatically, where if you're dealing with kings, queens, mothers of kings, children of royalty, there is a much broader subtext that he could then address and also subvert, because Brutus is definitely a subversion. So yeah, it's basically more flexing of the muscles, I guess. So I can see why they chose Romeo and Juliet for the basic class, and then Julius Caesar for the other one.
I was also happy to be in a class where I'd say at least half of us actually read it, so that was nice.
Yeah, and of course these days apparently you don't ever read the whole play, you just read excerpts.
Oh, we even when I was a sophomore in high school, we had printed out copies of excerpts of Homer's Odyssey. Yeah, and like copied, where like the text is a little wonky and there's like
Mm,
a black smudge down the side. Oh, it was the worst way to read that book or to read sections of that story. Um,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that was the same class that we did Julius Caesar and or we read
Mhm.
Julius Caesar. Yeah. I guess I don't necessarily want to go too specific into overanalyzing Shakespeare, but to kind of tie things back to Kharkanas, I did just reread Richard III,
Mm.
and then I read an essay that was sort of an analysis of the character, and I kept coming back to and being reminded of two main Kharkanas characters in this person's analysis of Richard, and for two different reasons. So the first of which that I was reminded was Hun Rao, because of the sort of manipulative, sort of politically manipulative kind of his situation, and also then in Fall of Light, he has a bit of a strange incident with the fire,
Mhm.
and a very spiritual sort of moment
Mhm.
that rereading Richard III with
Hmm.
the ghost visiting him, I was sort of reminded of those sorts of things. Um, Also, I'm not sure what Hun Rao's relationship is with women in his life, um, but he seems it doesn't seem like he has a very good relationship with women. And Richard III has a very clearly horrible understanding of, wooing or of speaking to and about the women in his life. So yeah, that was on one end, and then the other one was Narad, and that was because Richard III, his deformity or his
Mhm.
which I guess is pretty exaggerated in the play. There's so much about how he looks this way, and so he must be a villain. He must be an evil man. And there's sort of there's I guess this sort of divine like, oh, he was always evil. He was born like there's no way around it. He's just a bad man. Uh,
Mhm.
Whereas Narad in your works, uh, he's cruel early on, and then he gets beaten up for it, and he's disfigured. But it's sort of like he's disfigured by his choices. Like
Mhm.
he really accepts not that it was anything made him evil or wicked necessarily, other than himself. But now that he looks this way, he's just a rotten person. And I'd be curious if you could speak to either of those kind of
Hmm.
connections that I drew there.
It's been too long in terms of when I last read these things, but um, I guess what I was picking up on, but I mean, it's not even directly Shakespearean, but um, I probably was picking up on uh, the function, if you will, of characters within a story, um, and the roles they end up serving. And I guess in terms of Hanral, if I were to sort of summarize his notion of relationships, he has one lover and it comes from a bottle. So that sort of, in a sense, desexualizes him.
Okay.
Um, and for Narad, Narad was interesting. I didn't know initially, with that initial scene of him, getting beaten up. I didn't know that he was actually going to be a recurring character, and that one that I was going to fall into that particular point of view. Um, but yes, I mean, it's not universal, but there are many cultures who certainly view uh, physical deformity as indicative of moral, deformity or whatever, right? And I wanted to definitely write against that, but at the same time, you know, where the fates threw him, uh, made it a bit more challenging. So I realized that this was going to be a very, very gray area to explore for this character, and the question of redemption, and what can be redeemed and what is irredeemable, is something I wanted to explore with that stuff. And of course, I mean, with Shakespeare, you've got the complexity of characterization that's there. It's nothing is nearly or is as clear cut as it initially seems. But that's just, I wouldn't call it specifically Shakespearean. To me, it's more how you're going to view your characters as a writer, and do you give them sufficient space so that we can see all the sides of them that are relevant to them, and then secondarily to the story itself. And sometimes it's just in exploring a character, you open up sort of a whole new avenue or leaf in the story that you weren't anticipating before. And that's certainly what happened with Narad. So that opened up something completely different, and it just built from there, where things started getting a bit messy in terms of time and space, in terms of his mindset, and almost a blending of histories. And as an historian, you're well aware that history is not a fixed thing, right? It's in constant flux, and it's eternally revised. And so, even in the act of being taught history, by the time you've left high school, the sensibilities about that history could have completely changed. All right. So, so you're caught with what was at that time, and then you suddenly find yourself in a completely different approach to the notion of history. And that's personal as well. I mean, we revise our personal histories, as the circumstances require. And then you can, you do it socially, you do it or familially, you do it culturally, you do it nationally. It just builds up from there in terms of revision.
Mm-hmm.
And so Narad is definitely, he's a character who's given history that you saw within the story, and then you start getting some background stuff, and then he has thrust upon him a completely alternate history that projects into the future. So yeah, he's definitely in a confused state for sure.
And yeah, I guess that's brilliantly shown through, and the gray area is I guess he's with the I'm blanking on the character's name that he or that finds him in Fall of Light.
Yeah,
And names him,
and
loves him.
that character turned out to be quite complex as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, bit unexpected there, but I think once you sort of set a style for writing and exploration, in terms of narrative, that provides additional opportunities, and as a writer, one needs to sort of recognize them as they're happening, and then run with them, and be fearless in that respect.
Oh, and yeah, I should also say, like, when I'm like rereading certain Shakespeare stuff or reading analysis of those, and I think, oh, this reminds me of something in Kharkanas, it's not ever really I'm sure this was based specifically on this element.
I try not to.
Right.
Not to do that. Yeah, I try to sort of avoid lifting things intact and dropping them in, because if they've been, if one is inspired to lift something, clearly it was done well the first time, right? If it's done well the first time, then what you want to do is riff on it. You don't want to just copy it, right?
Right.
You want to sort of twist it and see what else you can find out of that particular circumstance or event.
I'd say I can see a number of times where your twisting around this, or you're playing with this idea of divine intervention in Kharkanas, and I guess again, one such way is like if Shakespeare's character is deformed because of just that's the way it is. That's how God determined things to be. Narad's deformity or and his personal hate or internal hatred for himself all comes from very much his personal world and not any kind of the divine world. And
No,
then of
no,
course you have
but
oh yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
but the whole point of that is the violence that is implicit within his culture was made explicit with Narad.
Okay.
So in other words, it is subtextually telling you that there is the potential of violence and completely surrounding this entire culture of the Teist.
Okay.
And so that foreshadows what's coming in terms of violence.
Okay. I might go to another question of someone,
Yeah,
just
sure.
if that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, I should say, before moving on from Tim H's question about style, he also added to let you know that he thinks it's the Kharkanas trilogy is a work of true art. It's two of the best books they've ever read or had the privilege to read, and they see it as your magnum opus and cannot wait for book 3. So.
Well, those are rare
I
opinions. Those are rare opinions, but
I agree with this comment. So, yeah. Another question comes from Bryson, and Bryson, he always watches and comments. He's like, I love always kind of seeing what he has to say about my different analysis, and if he takes things in a different or interprets things slightly differently. But he was curious how much of Kharkanas was gamed, and if not much of it was gamed, how much of it did you kind of think about whilst writing, in particular, the last few books of Book of the Fallen, where the setting itself started showing up.
yeah, none of it was gamed.
Okay.
None of it was gamed. But he's right in the sense that I was thinking about it. I guess by the time I was writing Toll the Hounds, I was thinking about it, and starting to sort of through flashbacks and all the rest, just sort of build a few things in that I was going to make use of, which is kind of ambushed me now because when I go to write Walk in Shadow, I have to go back and I have to go hunt these things down, and it's time consuming, that's for sure.
I guess speaking about writing Walk in Shadow, another question was from the Fantasy Thinker. And he has he's posted some videos on YouTube as well. Again, he comments a lot. So if you're watching, thank you for watching and for your comments as always. He was curious if there were any progress updates on Walk in Shadow, or if from what I understand, Witness is your main focus right now.
Yeah, the second Witness book is the main focus at the moment, and it's rolling along fine. Structurally, it's kind of curious. We'll have to see how that plays out. But I mean, I have maybe close to 200 pages of Walk in Shadow is already done.
Okay.
So I know that once I'm finished this second Witness book, it should be pretty seamless to slip into that and hopefully recapture some of the cadence and the voice and stuff. And it usually takes a bit to get there, and it depends on the characters involved and the scenario, because in some cases that diction level drops back down for certain characters and certain groups. And so I have to make sure that when I get to the Teist, especially, that I'm back on board with the style and the voice.
Yeah, I guess we did, the last time we spoke quite a bit about the Thai Civil War and everything in that kind of half of the story, but I don't believe we spoke that much about what Hood is planning, or the journey he's on. And yeah, I am maybe just curious about Hood. It seems like around the time that Kharkanas started to show up more in Book of the Fallen, or started to be referenced, maybe the concept started, Hood also really started to step onto the
Yeah.
main stage, so much so that I think I'd consider him one of my favorite characters. However, for someone reading Book of the Fallen through, I'd say maybe up until the scene, or one of the climactic scenes of Reaper's Gale, I'm not sure there's really much to see of Hood, or why it might be someone's favorite. So yeah, I am curious how he found his way more and more into the story. Was that always part of the plan? And then he's very important, obviously, in Kharkanas.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. You know, if you think that how he starts, he is simply the, you know, the curse name with respect to death. And so that's an aspect that was sitting there right from the beginning, and was in the gaming as well. But of course, both Cam and I, when we game, it's kind of like we have, or we had, a kind of a radar on those elements of almost traditional world building in fantasy and mythology, where those well-established roles, as the Lord of Death, for example, or specific, I guess, god associations or goddess associations with certain aspects of the human condition, where they're often almost kept symbolic, so that they don't have an identity beyond their function. And Cam and I, every time we sort of threw one of these things into our campaigns and our narratives, when we were gaming, it's like we both recognize that no, there's a hidden story behind all that stuff, and there's an identity buried in that mythology, and our instincts were to head in that direction, and sort of open up the backstories of major players that are kind of dealt with in a lazy fashion by many characters within that world, as they would be, right?
Sure.
But no, there's more to it. And so, you know, all the way through the early books, you've got Hood's name being thrown around, you know, all over the place, quite carelessly, which sort of sets the stage for you know, the writers to then start unfolding some of that backstory. And I guess, in a sense, what that does is, on a reread, it changes. Every time you read, you know, the name Hood being thrown out there, it resonates in a different way than it did the first time around.
I mean, definitely, I can definitely agree with that. I'm actually, for the first time, I'm rereading them via, or I'm doing the audiobooks, just to see. I mean, with all of the talk I've done recently about adaptation potential and what adaptations could be like, I've always kind of thought of audiobooks, they're already an adaptation.
Their performance, yeah.
Right. And so I'm really, I listened to the first 3 last year, and I feel bad, but I'm blanking on the narrator's name for those. I believe it was Ralph something.
Ralph Lister.
Ralph Lister, right? And then the switch to Michael Page, maybe.
Yeah.
To Michael Page. And so I find it interesting hearing those differences. I'm curious a little bit when it comes to those sorts of things, how much input you have, or is it really just Tor and Bantam? Okay.
Zero.
Okay.
Zero. They didn't, neither one contacted me on
Okay.
pronunciation. Apparently they didn't contact each other on pronunciation.
Right.
So
Yeah.
no, zero. That said, I did have input with the reader for the Kharkanas
Okay. Okay.
Forge. And I remember the reader saying that this was very, very readable in terms of the audio production. And it didn't surprise me because it was kind of written that way, because that breath length became part of the cadence. So reading out loud is quite effortless. And my understanding is I tend not to listen. I certainly don't listen to audiobooks of my own, but I tend not to listen to any audiobooks. And it's my own personal bias on this, is that, even for the Malazan stuff, almost anything, with the exception of the willful child stuff, these are written as books. They're not written,
Right.
for that medium.
Right.
And I don't know how well suited they are to it. I think the Kharkanas stuff is probably better suited to it. And I think the willful child stuff, from what I caught from the people who did it, the performative aspect of it was a lot of fun for them. And I
Okay.
think that fun sort of shows, it comes through in the audio. So yeah, it's not something I do. And I'm always I kind of get nervous when somebody says they're doing the Malazan stuff via audio for the first time,
Mhm.
because I'm thinking, I don't know how you can do that, right?
Yeah, I always worry about what they might miss,
Oh,
and I don't want anyone, I'd hate to be in a conversation on YouTube and talking about something, and then sort of spoil something that they've already read or like listened to, but and because I don't want to embarrass anyone by talking about an element of the story that maybe they just missed. And again, I'm sure different people's minds might work different, or definitely work differently than
mhm.
mine, but I find audiobooks they're difficult for me to pay attention to.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, so like I think even going through Book of the Fallen on audio, it's sort of like listening to, like, on my drive to and from work, it's sort of like listening to a podcast of people talking about my favorite series, or something like that, more than it is actually like digesting the content of the story itself.
Yeah.
Or it's like, oh right, I remember this scene. I remember that, but then my mind sometimes just totally starts to think about something else,
Yeah.
and I just find it really difficult to pay attention. The only book last year that I didn't really enjoy was, granted it wasn't fantasy, so that's already part of probably the problem. It's not something, it was a crime thriller kind of murder mystery sort of thing, and I listened to it on audiobook. I think that's the first time I've ever listened to, like, the only way that I consumed a book was through audio, and I just did not enjoy it. And I there's so many caveats there, because was it the narration? Was it the rate that I listened to it? Like, how long it took me to get through it? I don't really know.
I think a lot of it is related to style.
Okay.
And I don't mean the style of the reader or the performance or anything, the actual writing style. My what I don't know if it's true, actually, well, now that I think about it, but my initial sense I was going to describe here is that if you write in a Windex style, that's the term that we were taught. Basically, it's see-through style of writing. So sentence construction is relatively simple. There's an aversion to anything lyrical, and it's a straightforward narrative, Hemingway-esque style narrative.
Mhm.
I think that narrative, that style, is actually far better suited to audio than sort of a dense lyrical poetic style,
Mhm.
unless the reader is prepared to slow down in those moments and luxuriate in the language. Um, but most of these people who are doing these productions and doing the readings, they got a lot on their slate, and so they're getting through the narrative, in as well, not quick, but economical fashion as possible.
Mhm.
So it's I think it may be a stylistic thing, but I do know that when I heard some snippets from some of the Malazan stuff on audio, um, even the emphasis within sentences was contrary to what I would have done,
Okay.
and quite often where I'm writing stuff that's intended to be understated, it would be over dramatized. And again, I'd wince when we got to those moments. So it just became excruciating to listen to, and not because of any problems from the reader, but my internal voice was completely different. And so those two were running they were clashing against each other in terms of what I was listening to. And I found that to be less the case when I listened to the opening bits of Forge of Darkness.
Okay. Okay.
So, and also The God Is Not Willing. That reading was superb. So
Is that the same narrator as?
no,
Okay.
yeah, completely different.
Okay.
And she was great because she contacted me. We spent 2-3 hours on a Zoom call, going over pronunciations and discussing various things.
Oh, it's
And
wonderful.
she'd already read the book, so she wasn't, it wasn't like, sometimes you get a sense that the person doing the performance is read it an hour beforehand, first time
Yeah.
around, and just rolls in for it. And some people are very good that way. So it's everybody has different approaches, obviously. I'm probably going
Okay.
to get trashed for something I just said, but anyways.
Oh. I'll put a disclaimer saying if you're sensitive to conversations about audiobooks,
Yeah, I think you
skip
might
to
want
this
to.
moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just yeah, I don't know, it's not what I've grown up with. But also, now that I think about it, I used to go to many readings, contemporary fiction authors doing their tours across Canada, and a good reading of a work can just be extraordinary.
Mhm.
I remember being to a reading with Timothy Finley, I think it's Finley, um, Latin, Not Wanted on the Voyage. And his reading was fantastic. And I went out and bought the book, and the book wasn't nearly as good as his reading. So, and it was a good book, but it didn't have that verb, I guess.
Okay.
So performance plays a huge role, in these books. And it's not in the author's control unless they're self-published and they hire the performer.
Right. Right. Well, I guess maybe another thing I'm curious about what is or isn't in the author's control, the cover art, and things like that, the different editions. Um,
I
r-
know. It's frustrating that quite often, people come on to BookTube or whatever, and they may complain about a particular cover as if it's the author's fault. And it's like,
right.
I don't know where to start on that one. We have no control over that stuff at all. Absolutely none. I remember Tor's first edition of Gardens of the Moon. I fought tooth and nail against that cover.
Oh, is that where
Yeah,
some soul
yeah,
knight is on the
yeah,
horse?
yeah.
And yeah,
And it was hopeless.
yeah.
The author's opinion is utterly irrelevant to the marketing team in a publishing house.
Mhm.
And so I think that really needs to be understood by anybody out there wanting to commenting on covers. We have no control over those covers unless we're self-publishing. None.
Now, I do love the Subterranean press artwork. I'm
Mm.
curious, are you contacted about some of those, or are you more a fan of those?
Yeah.
Yeah.
what often happened, at least in the first iteration of the 10 books, was that I got to see the illustrations before they showed up, and I've never had any issues with them. An artist will interpret as they interpret, and I'm perfectly happy with that. That should be what an artist does, isn't it? Right?
Right, right.
They take these descriptions and they visualize them. And that's fantastic. So no, I tend not to step on the toes of the artists. And the sub press stuff has been spectacular. So
Yeah, are you I guess Forge of Darkness they have it in their warehouse right now, or are you working on signing
apparently,
those?
yeah.
Or-
I've not heard. I
okay.
know we sort of signed an agreement on it. I'm trying to remember if I've even done the signing sheets yet. I don't know if I have. That's an interesting case. I was quite specific in my directions for the covers for Forge of Darkness and Fall of Light, and what I had in mind for Walk in Shadow.
Okay.
And it turns out that when the books came out, people hated those covers. So,
Oh, really?
so don't rely on the art on the author. Obviously, what do we know?
Well, I like the what's on the cover, or what I imagine is on the cover right now, where it's Erethan, right? Or a Forge of Darkness. Is it of the suppressed cover?
I've not seen the suppressed
Oh, okay,
cover.
okay. I think I think it's the cover, or it's it's an image they have posted on their website.
All right.
Again, I'm not sure what will make it to, like, what will actually be the cover,
Mhm.
but yeah. I know there's one depiction of Erethan, and I think
All
it's
right. Okay.
really
All right.
lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I don't think I've seen them.
Yeah.
Curiously, but yeah.
I might I'll see another question. Also, we can I'm not sure what your what your schedule looks like for today, but if
I'm
we
fine.
go on for too long, just let me know. And
No, we're okay.
okay. So someone named Whiskey Jack has a question. They ask, there's a big theme in the Kharkanas books regarding the satisfaction that comes with surrender or sacrifice. Considering this idea turns out to be the backbone behind the power system of the Warrens, with Karul especially, but perhaps also Draconis with his gifts that he gives. Was there an overarching philosophy that you were attempting to highlight or discuss with gift giving, sacrifice, that sort of thing?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But as a question, it's something I'd have to think about for a while.
Okay.
And it's been a while since I've written them. So but in terms of gift giving, well, no, with Draconis, it's based on personality trait. And the effort to buy love, basically, through material objects.
Okay.
And there's a pathos involved in all of that, right? So that's part of that story. It's part of Draconis's his inability to actually change his own behavior in this respect, and the impulses that drive him repeat through time. And as for the other stuff, I'm trying to think in terms of satisfaction regarding sacrifice. Was that it? Yeah.
Yes. Let me. I don't want to get the words too twisted. Yeah. The satisfaction that comes with surrender / sacrifice.
Surrender and sacrifice. I wonder what specifics that the questioner had in mind with that one.
They specifically reference the creation of the Warrens.
Oh, cruel. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the only thing that they
yeah,
specifically brought up.
there may be an element at which, gifts given freely are rarely appreciated.
Okay.
Yeah. And open to, more, I guess, maybe more open to abuse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. There were one or two more. So, and I might get this wrong because I think it's a Spanish name, and my pronunciation is never great with the C's and stuff. Kalinico Bo says if it's not too off topic, he's wondering about, or he or she, they're wondering about Rejoice, and if you plan to write any subsequent books in that setting, kind of building off of their question. I don't know if I remember you mentioning it directly to me, or if someone else had mentioned it to me, that after Witness and after Kharkanas, you were thinking of maybe just more science fiction stuff, or yeah.
Yeah, I've got how many have I got? I've got two novels in progress. One is not science fiction. I guess it's fantasy adventure, kind of, but the other one it's a time travel novel. And the Rejoice, I certainly mapped out what I was going to do with the follow-up novel in that series. But I don't know if I should get into this, but real world events are kind of overtaking at the moment. I doubt many people have their finger in this particular pulse, but because I did so much, the nature of the research I did for Rejoice has left me with my finger on this particular pulse. But the UFO UAP inquiry that's going on in Congress in the States is fairly eye-opening, and so I'm sort of sitting on a fence there, waiting to see what's going to play out in the next few years.
Okay. I actually have a question, or my fiance Jen has a question. Or we were just talking about, now that she's met you, she's thinking maybe more about trying out some of your work. However, she's never been the biggest epic fantasy fan. And I can't really help her with recommendations for your other work, but she was just sort of wondering if something like Rejoice might be a decent place to start, or This River Awakens, or your book of short fiction. I forget the name of that. I have it somewhere back there. But yeah, she was just curious where.
Well, it would depend on what she likes to read.
Yeah, most of her, well, she has rather varied tastes. She reads a decent amount of romance, but isn't ever. I've seen her be just as harsh and critical with those as others that she loves. So it's not like she will read and enjoy every single romance story. And she also enjoys. I think she does enjoy science fiction TV series and that sort of thing more than your typical like fantasy series. So that's why I was thinking maybe something like Rejoice might be a little more
Maybe. It depends again, what attracts her to the science fiction series. Is it the action, or is it the characters? Is it the scenario, the plot? Because Rejoice, it's not an action-filled storyline, right? It's a contemplative storyline. So if that's the kind of stuff that interests her, then yeah, Rejoice would be an option. If on the other hand, it were like something like Tall Tales, then maybe Fishing with Grandma Mechi or something along those lines.
Okay.
This River Awakens, it's a dark novel.
Oh,
So yeah.
okay, yeah. She enjoys dark, I guess, content as far as the murder mystery kind of genre and the tropes that are typical there, which I'm not sure, from what I understand of This River Awakens. I don't think it has anything really to do with that, but
No, there's a body, but that's about it.
okay, okay. Yeah. Yeah, there's just a sort of side tangent there with your other work, and
Mm.
also I guess a plug for and everyone watching. There's stuff beyond Malazan, and there's stuff beyond this world. Um,
And if she's a Star Trek fan, she could certainly go for the Willful Child stuff.
yeah, no, not yet. And I'm only barely a Star Trek fan, where I've seen a number of the films and I have enjoyed those. But I haven't really gotten into any of the series.
All
So
right.
hopefully when I start to get more
Mm.
into the show, then I'll bring her along with me for that journey. But yeah. Let's see. As most of the questions that were asked. Someone, Jose Schmitz, was wondering how you managed to converge so many plot lines into big moments, and how you can also make your readers immediately care for random characters from an opening line where it's the first time we've seen this person, and maybe it's the only scene that we ever get of this person in a battle or something like that.
Mhm.
He's asking specifically, or I guess notice that you do this in Bone Hunters and Reaper's Gale more than the other books. But
I don't know. I don't know. It's partly the short story background, which um, you're under, as a short story writer, you're under pressure to nail a character down very, very quickly. And in that sense, the details you choose are based on that kind of selection, in terms of not necessarily denotative impact, but connotative impact. So the details you give are always carrying more weight than they appear on the surface. But that stuff that's connotative then needs to be unified. You can't just sort of randomly throw it out there, because what happens is a reader is subconsciously picking this stuff up and carrying it with them. And if it becomes if it becomes the equivalent of cleaning out your garage, and your arms are covered in all kinds of stuff hanging off as you're stumbling out of the garage, it's not going to work. But if everything is unified on that level, then it becomes much easier to carry it all with you. So I don't know, it's a terrible metaphor, but terrible analogy. But anyways, I don't know. I mean, some things are kind of mysterious and can be difficult to deconstruct. I can give an example. I've just I was writing yesterday, and I stumbled on a character, and this character we last saw. This is a bit of a spoiler thing, but it'll keep people guessing. But we last saw in Fall of Light. But this character is showing up out of the blue, quite literally. A number of characters showing up out of the blue in the Witness Seven Cities stuff.
Okay.
And one of them had a very, in terms of personality, we never had this character's point of view, but we had the point of view of somebody quite familiar with this character who was traveling with this character. And what's been frustrating lately, because I knew, well, once I stumbled onto these characters are going to pop up, probably just for a cameo of some sort. I went into my bookcases, my storage area and stuff in the house to track down Fall of Light, and realized that I had packed every single copy of Fall of Light, and it was off in a storage container
Oh no.
halfway across the city. I don't have a single copy of Fall of Light. So I ended up finding it, the electronic version of the draft I sent to the publishers. Or maybe the draft that AP sent back to me. And it was some kind of version. But so I could do a find and electronically and get to those parts and read those sections. But actually, what I did was I got to those sections simply to find and remind myself of the character's full name.
Okay.
So that's as far as I went. So I didn't keep reading. And what was interesting was when I was writing yesterday, I fell into I'm gonna have to do this character's point of view. But before I got to their point of view, they had a conversation with somebody, a character from this book, this world, Seven Cities. And I cannot explain, but the voice of that character that I last sort of explored way back writing Fall of Light just came back instantly. I had that character's voice, and it's kind of uncanny. And so, I was walking home afterwards thinking, well, is that character just been sitting in my head all this time, just waiting for me to sort of, tap them on the shoulders, and they step forward and there they are. I cannot explain these things. It's unnerving sometimes. The things that seem to be hidden in the subconscious, that can just be called upon, as needed.
That has me so excited for finding out who this is. And also sort of, I'm wondering if that character will then again show up in Walk in Shadow, if anything.
No.
Okay.
No, it won't show up in Walk in Shadow.
Okay.
No, when they step off stage in Fall of Light, they step off stage.
Okay.
In fact, what happens is they've just step back into the scenarios with this book I'm writing right now.
Oh,
So yeah, they've been elsewhere and busy. But the character showed up because there's a comedic element to that character that I really wanted to sort of touch on again. And what's strange, of course, is for me is I don't know if I'm going to return to that little tiny story, that snippet, and those characters at all in this trilogy.
Okay.
But they're just showing up, and I guess kind of more to indicate that life goes on elsewhere, and people are busy doing whatever it is they're doing, and can just incidentally appear in this story and then disappear again, which would probably frustrate readers to no end. But
someone one of those questions, they had a sort of follow-up asking about potential inconsistencies between Kharkanas and Book of the Fallen, and inconsistencies in the lore. How much of that was intentionally just it's a different narrative, like it's a different voice and specific character that's narrating things, and how much of it was you couldn't, or like you didn't exactly remember how things played out in one story and figured, oh, it doesn't necessarily matter to get things.
Well, yeah, I'm not that lazy. But what I was thinking was, in fact, I had to make a conscious effort not to go back and look for specific details. And this goes back to our discussions on history and historians and telling tales of the past. And so, no, I consciously decided, no, this is going to be Galan's story, and he's going to construct in such a way that it is cohesive and internally consistent without any necessary bearing on somebody else's version of these events. It's going to be a self-contained narrative. So, and what that does to me, or it did for me, is it freed me up. That I did not have to adhere too closely to stuff that had already been established. That I could surrender virtually anything of, you know, that history in service to the narrative that Galan is creating. And that's why it's so overt. You know, the opening and closings of the novels could not be more overt. That this is his story, and this is how he's going to tell it. So, and you know, it's partly to dismantle or break down that that assumption, if you will, that there is a single fixed past. The whole point is that there isn't. It's malleable. It's protein. It changes constantly. And as much as, you know, like a history book or any narrative, you want, you know, the reader will approach it with an expectation of veracity, and that this somehow, it's the whole notion of canon, for example, which is to me nonsense. Just because, you know, something's been written, big deal, you know, you can retell that story. You can change specifics. There's nothing to stop, you know, a writer, a creator, an artist to completely mess up canon, and it doesn't matter, right? It's so that idea that there is a fixed history, a timeline, if you will, a sequence of events, and all that kind of stuff, which is, you know, something we all need in terms of our internal narratives or our life stories. You know, we try to create a consistency that, you know, basically didn't exist. Because none of us know what we're doing at any one time, anyways. But then we reinvent those, you know, that sense of the past and create an internal narrative. It's not consistent with anyone else's. So, you know, why assume otherwise? Even if you were to write it down, it's not going to be consistent. So let go of that stuff. That's kind of what I'm trying to say here.
People bringing up the canon and citing the Lord of the Rings canon, for instance. I mean, I have right here are the first 8 volumes of Christopher Tolkien's History of Middle-earth, which are full of, this is one version of a story, and then the next volume you get 2 letters that contradict that version. And again, it's like you said, it's not laziness, it's just considering the story in a different way from different points of views and different iterations. And and so with like adaptations and people trying to cite the one way things were, the one specific story of the lore, I think it gets a little ridiculous. But
well, I mean, you know, step into visual arts and think of portraiture. Right, you know, starting, you can go back to the Roman times if you want. You can look at a statue of Cleopatra or a bust of Cleopatra or Julius Caesar or whatever, and you know, you might walk away thinking, well, that's exactly what that person looked like. You would be foolish to do so, because there were propagandistic impulses that were going on there, not to mention the knowledge of the artist, whether they had ever seen that person to begin with. So whether it's, you know, the paintings of Alexander and all the rest, these are simply versions, and that's all we've got to go on. And so with portraiture, I don't know how many paintings I've seen of Henry VIII, quite a few, and none of them are you know, or rather, in my mind, I think none are accurate representations of, because there's so many other things going on there, right? The choice of the attire, like the clothing, the stance that they take. Some of these are culturally defined, and some are symbolically important to royalty and power, and you know, all of that. Those belief systems that needed visual aids for the audience. And are these portraits accurate? Well, not really. They're symbolically accurate. That's a whole different thing.
Yeah. I mean, is Shakespeare's Henry VIII accurate? Or
Yeah.
was Henry VIII maybe just Elizabeth's father, and Shakespeare was writing a play for... and that's actually one that I haven't read, but I've read a lot about Henry VIII. I haven't read or seen any production of the play, but I've heard it's one of the weaker ones and one of the most, I don't know if propaganda is too strong of a word.
Well, it's down to, it's down to getting paid, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are other pressures on the creation of that one.
Yeah.
He can't be too overt in subverting everything he's writing about.
Would you ever consider painting versions of Kadaspala's paintings and his portraits?
Whoa, no.
No, okay.
But that's precisely what he's talking about in Forge of Darkness, right?
Right,
he's
right.
talking about the propagandistic function of portraiture. And that's been prevalent since the first cities arose. When you're looking at I don't know, name me an early Babylonian king or whatever, right? And you're looking at the murals and the friezes, the frescoes and stuff. All of these things have had political and cultural functions and purposes. And sometimes to the extent of making the ruler or king 9 feet tall compared to everybody else, this kind of stuff. And who knows, maybe they were, but we don't need to take that literally.
Yeah.
You can if you want, but you don't need to. This is the point I'm making, that everything is being shaped for an effect or a series of effects that are very much living and breathing within that culture. And so if it's now an extinct culture, it's risky to attempt to interpret the actual significance of these things. It's easier to do with portraiture. I mean, there's quite often, as Kadaspala would say, there's really nothing subtle in what portraiture is up to, right? So it is a bit easier there.
Yeah, I would love to see someone have a crack at least the portrait of Vatha
Sander?
Yeah. I think that would be.
No, I think the thing that I was most intrigued on as potentially doing was, I think there's a sculpture that's described of this, these wolves all circling circling a single wolf. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I would love if I knew how to do any of that stuff and cast in bronze. I would love to do that one.
Yeah.
Because that one that one intrigues me, even as as a mental image, because there's so much more going on with that one. You don't know if it's one animal killing itself, right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I know Rise Harat comments on it several times, and I believe Endest Salon might also have a thing or two to say about it.
Yeah,
maybe when he goes on his walk through the city, where he's in Forge of the High Mage, I was surprised to see him show up in the first in the character list, and then I saw him show up, and I was like, oh wow,
yeah, it's pretty cool.
What's he doing?
Yeah.
What's he musing over this time?
Yeah. No, I really like what Can did with the Teist. Well, that was really cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I have too many other follow-up questions. We got through what the people comment, or the comments that I got. I don't know. I guess I'm only about 100 or so pages into Forge of the High Mage. So any
oh, sorry, I gave stuff away. Sorry about that.
No, I'm not sure if you did.
No, okay.
I didn't really catch it.
Good, good.
But yeah, I'm very excited to see where it goes, and
Mm.
I love the opportunity to fall in love with Malik Rel all over again.
Well, he's so lovable, isn't he?
Oh, he's amazing. What a sweetheart,
Mhm.
that Malik Rel.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'm hoping to get, I'm pretty sure actually the cam's going to come down to ICFA next year. So
oh, great. Okay,
yeah.
great. I may not be at ICFA next
Ah,
year, because it looks like it's 2 or 3 days right after my wedding.
all
So,
right.
so depending on what we do,
Wait,
honeymoon.
hold on. You're not going to honeymoon at Orlando Marriott Airport
Probably not.
Hotel?
Well, they do have these nice restaurants around there. We could go to Red Robin for.
Yeah, there's a Red Robin. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I have some people coming to the wedding are going up to Orlando
All
after
right,
the
cool.
wedding for Disney stuff.
All right.
So who knows? Maybe if I don't know. I'm not saying absolutely not
Mm,
to me coming to ICFA next year, but
mm.
we'll just have to see how
Yeah,
much free time we have, and also I'll have asked off for a decent amount of work by then, so I
hmm,
might not even be able to get the time off unless
right.
I can convince them somehow that this conference is connected to my work. Um,
Uh,
I mean, if I wrote a paper that was has something like that,
if
that
you wrote a
was.
paper, I don't know what the theme is next year.
Yeah, I'm
I don't
kind of waiting to
recall.
see.
But you've got enough imaginative people on your side that will be able to find an angle for you that should make sense.
Right. Well, I am thinking about writing something. I don't know again if I would be presenting it there next year or not, or reading it there, but I'm thinking about finales, and the epic battle at the end of fantasy. And again, of course, citing Fall of Light, as the inversion of that. But then I don't know if I'd want to go back to where, like, try and see where that began with epic storytelling, or
Wow.
I'm not
Well,
sure. Yeah, that again, that's
Iliad?
probably longer than a conference paper.
Yeah, I would say the Iliad is where
Right.
you the
Yeah.
epic battle at the end.
uh,
Can't
Yeah.
think of, no, there's nothing in Gilgamesh that sort of echoes that. So yeah, at least in
And
the West,
yeah. I
Iliad would
emailed
be it.
Matt to see if he had any kind of recommendations on the lit analysis side of things. So
Hmm.
and he gave me some things. That's in an email though, so I'll have to go back and look through
This
it.
is Matt Oliver.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah. Well, man, he's one smart dude.
yeah.
Yeah.
uh, yeah. And I also I just thank you again for just, I don't know, just speaking with me at ICFA and inviting me into those conversations. It was just such a blast. And I'll be doing a video with with Daniel Creed soon
Hmm.
here about the circus of Dr. Lau, because he kept
Yeah,
talking
I'm
about
sure
it.
you
And so
will. Yeah.
I figured, oh, I better read this and then chat with him about that. So
Mm.
yeah, just talking with so many people and I'm meeting so many wonderful people. It was a blast. And
It's a good conference. Yeah.
yeah. Um, well, we've kind of drifted away from
Hmm.
Kharkanas, so I might, and I think we've been going for hour and a half or so now, so I
Okay.
might end the recording if that's okay, unless you have
Yep.
any other teases.
No,
Um,
no, I'm good.
Maybe just one final thing. Do you have any prediction on when Walk in Shadow would come out? Uh,
Well, it will be a year after I deliver the
okay,
manuscript.
okay,
I mean, that's how it's done these days. And there seems to be no rushing it. It's glacial. Um, you deliver the manuscript and then you sit and wait. Well, you don't wait, you start something else. But the copy editing, well, the editing and the copy editing, these days they tend to both come at the same time. So That speeds things up on my end anyways, but publishers will have specific, they need to slot the release into their overall sort of schedule of book releases.
Okay.
So that can push things back as well. It's like the release date for Forge of the High
Oh
Mage
yeah,
in
yeah.
the US. That's not down to anything Cam has decided. All right, that's the
Right.
publishers. Yeah,
I can't imagine how frustrating that is. I
yeah, it's
mean, that
frustrating.
just, yeah.
Yeah, so don't blame us. It's
No,
your
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Uh, all right. Well, thank you again so much for coming on here. Always fun talking. And
Yeah, it was fun.
thank you everyone for watching. Have a good one. Bye.